Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sree's daily global COVID-19 show. My name is Sree Sreenivasan, and it's my honor to convene this daily conversation around various aspects of the COVID-19 crisis. On this daily program, we discuss aspects of three crises: the health crisis, the financial crisis, and the inequality crisis. We're always looking for speakers and theme suggestions. Please email us, Sree@Sree.net. Episode 174 is tonight. We've been on the air for 174 straight days. And we have a very important conversation tonight about Wisconsin in crisis. And we're going to meet two people in Wisconsin and one, a New Yorker who's a former Wisconsin resident and journalist. My co-host, Bob Anthony, at New York Bob. We're going to call him Wisconsin Bob for the day. And he's going to be with us. He's a tech journalist and former reporter for newspapers in Wisconsin. We're also joined by Amber Wichowsky. She's a professor of political science at Marquette. She writes about economic inequality and much more. She's at Amber Wichowsky. Please follow her. We're also going to be joined by Dayvin Hallmon, who is former Kenosha County Board Supervisor at Kenosha County and is the founder of the Black String Triage Ensemble, and a very important organization that works to bring music in the middle of violence that takes place in Wisconsin. So we're going to hear from him and meet the others in just a moment. Hello, everybody. I'm Sree, and thank you so much for being here. I'm the Marshall Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation at Stony Brook School of Journalism and the co-founder of Digimentors, a social, digital, and virtual events consulting company. Our motto: don't cancel your event without talking to us. We want to work with you and your virtual events. My email address is right here. Our show is live right now on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn. Please share this with your friends and family. They can join us now or later. Please tag them right now. In our first 165 episodes, we've had more than 1 million viewers and 122 million social impressions, more than 300 guests from 62 cities in 16 countries, including the chief scientist of the World Health Organization. We're very grateful to Scroll.in and Scroll Global for running our show, and to our producers, Rose Horowitz at Rose Horowitz 31 and Vandana Menon, Vandana_Menon. All our archives are on youtube.com/SreenET. Usually we start by thanking our sponsors, but I know our sponsors will understand that this topic is so important. Want to get right into the conversation, and we will do the sponsor thank yous a little while. Let's first bring on Bob Anthony, who has been my friend for decades and journalist. Hi, Bob. How are you?
Good to see you, Sree, as always.
And I'm sorry that we're talking today in tough circumstances. We're trying to understand this former state that you lived in, you went to school in. Tell us about your Wisconsin connections. You're right now in Brooklyn, of course.
Well, I look back fondly on my early days in Wisconsin. I attended the journalism school at the University of Wisconsin, and during that time, my first internship was a summer in Racine at the Racine Journal-Times. So I count that as my first paid journalism job. And a year later, I was working for the Milwaukee Sentinel, the old morning daily. And for 2 years while I was there, I was the one-person Racine bureau, which covered both Racine and Kenosha counties. So it's Wisconsin's an interesting state. It's a lot of red with dots of blue in it in Milwaukee, Racine, Kenosha, Green Bay, and Madison. So I can see why it's an interesting state. It's a lot more than milk and cheese, and it's political football right now.
And we know that President Trump will be there tomorrow, even though he's been told not to come.
Yes, both the mayor of Kenosha and Governor Tony Evers have suggested strongly that he not come by, just to let the county heal. But he's coming anyway.
And of course, this all started with the shooting of Jacob Blake on Sunday, and so exactly a week and 1 day ago. And here we are today. And we are going to address all of these issues. And we have two Wisconsin Knights, is that the right term? Who are going to help us understand what's going on there. So let me start by bringing in our professor. And I'm just going to show everybody again who we're talking to. Amber Wichowsky is with us. She's a professor of political science. And Dayvin Hallmon is a former Kenosha County Board Supervisor, and he'll be with us as well. And he's the founder of the Black String Triage Ensemble. He'll tell us all about that in just a minute. Let's say first, hello to Professor Wichowsky. Hello, Professor.
Oh, thank you for having me tonight.
Thank you for being here. I know that this is late on a Monday night for you. Tell us how you're doing. How's your family? And how did they do through the pandemic? And what is Marquette, a leading university in America? It happens to be in Wisconsin. What are you doing in terms of class prep and things like that?
Yeah, so my family's doing well. I have two young children, so we're managing, virtual school, remote learning. We are, I think, we're week 2 at Marquette University. So our campus is open, but it does not look the same by any stretch of the imagination. So some students are taking fully online classes. Some students are taking a mix of online and in-person classes where they are wearing masks and socially distanced. I'm teaching online this semester, and I've been working with a team of undergraduate students at Marquette where we've been gathering social media data, campaign transcripts, speeches, debate transcripts, campaign ads, trying to make sense of the issue landscape as we head into the 2020 election.
And that's so timely without even this crisis, but the crisis makes it even more timely. How are your students handling all the news and such attention being paid to Wisconsin suddenly?
Yeah, I think, our students on one hand, this isn't new. We've had an entire summer of our students, many of whom have been protesting, have been kind of watching, have really been politicized. For some students, this is going to be the first presidential election that they're eligible to vote in, first federal election that they'd be eligible to vote in. We've had students, I think my class last week, I had at least one student who said, I'm going to exercise my my civic responsibility, and I'm, protesting in solidarity, and so I won't be in class today. So, Marquette has a very, I'd say, politically diverse campus, and I'm expecting that my class is at 9:30 tomorrow morning. I'm expecting we will be very much talking about the events in Kenosha and trying to make sense of where we are in this country today.
And could I correct you on one thing, Sree?
Yes, please.
The question isn't what is Marquette? The answer is we are Marquette.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. We are Marquette. That's right.
Tell us about Marquette so that people watching around the world about its history, its numbers. Just give people a sense of it, please. Yeah,
sure. Marquette is a private Catholic university. We're located in the heart of Milwaukee. We are one of the first Catholic universities that admitted women. We were the first and celebrated last year the 50th anniversary of our Educational Opportunity Program, our EOP program. There's a rich tradition at Marquette around issues of social justice. Our students are very engaged politically. I would say I'm expecting a lot of, despite the social distancing and all of that, I'm expecting a lot of political activity on campus. As I mentioned, our students have been, some of whom have been protesting, but we also have just a rich tradition of engaging with one another. We try to really facilitate that in the classroom, to deliberate about these issues, to listen to one another, to really look to see the human dignity in each one of us. And so I'm really proud to have spent the last decade of my career at Marquette University.
Wonderful. We're just looking at a map before we bring on Dayvin. We're just looking at a map right now of Wisconsin. I just want to give people a sense of where everything is. Chicago is just below
That's
Wisconsin.
right.
You see Milwaukee, Kenosha, Chicago, just in a kind of a straight line. Can everyone see that? Where Lake Michigan goes down here, and so you see Chicago, you see Detroit to the right, you see Cleveland to the right, you see Green Bay, you see Oshkosh, and then to the left of Wisconsin, you see Minneapolis, which of course was ground zero for the start of the racial protests after the killing of George Floyd. So anything else that we should know when you're looking at this map?
Oh, there's so much to know about. Bob was talking about kind of a state that's reddish with dots of blue. When we look back, not just at 2016, even just the elections, really since the time that I've been in Wisconsin, we've seen a real divide in the state between the urban parts of the state and the rural parts of the state. And in 2016, Trump exceeded kind of expectations and really ran up margins in the rural parts of the state. It's part of the explanation for why he won Wisconsin and why he won the Electoral College, though losing the popular vote. And so thinking about 2020 and this political geography, there are just some areas of the state that I'm paying attention to. I'll be looking to see turnout in Milwaukee, particularly Black voter turnout in the city. We'll be looking at what we might think of as the more purplish or swing parts of the state. So you had mentioned Green Bay. That's, we're going up to Brown County and the Fox River Valley. That tends to be a bit more of the swingier part of the state where we would see voters going for Obama in 2012, shifting to Trump in 2016. The western part of that state kind of going toward Minneapolis is also a swingier, I'd say, area that has been trending blue, even though it is more rural kind of pockets. But up in that far north, that is, communities that are much less densely populated. It is more rural, and that really has been, where the base of Trump's support has been. The question, and as we're thinking about these protests, has really been about, not just the urban-rural divide, but also the kind of the suburban areas of the state. And so, the suburbs here in Wisconsin, it's an area where Trump didn't do all that as well. These tend to be historically, traditionally Republican strongholds. These are kind of the ring counties surrounding Milwaukee. They shifted quite a bit in Clinton's direction. Trump has been trying to, in some sense, win these voters, but it's been, I guess we'll kind of see. And we're going to see what the reaction is to Trump's visit to Kenosha tomorrow.
Thank you. So let's bring in Dayvin to tell us his story. I'm just going to bring him on screen so he can join us. Our guest is Dayvin Hallmon, who is visiting with us as well. Thank you for being here, Dayvin. So let me bring him on, and so he can say hello to everybody. Hello.
Good evening.
Good to see you.
Thank you for being here. Bob, you want to tell us how you met Dayvin?
Well, as I said before, I used to be a reporter at the old Milwaukee Sentinel, and my copy chief there was a guy named Jim Lynch, and I actually used to sub on the copy desk on the Sentinel for a while. He did a career pivot, and now he's a pastor of a Lutheran church in Kenosha, and he's been very active in the community since he got there, and especially now. And I was trying to get him on the show. He's a little too busy tonight. But then another friend sent me a link to a long missive that talked about the failures of the city of Kenosha, the failures of the county, and the basically the fact that the politicians in Kenosha have been deaf for a long time. And that was written by Dayvin, who I didn't know up until today. But it turns out that Dayvin knows Jim. And so through the magic of Facebook and texts and without even a phone call, we found him. And he's a former Kenosha County Board member, knows the area extremely well, and I just thought he'd be a great guest for the show.
Thank you, Dayvin. Thank you for being here. My first question always, how are you? How are you doing through the pandemic, your family? And then we'll get to your work.
Well, thus far I'm alive. My significant other's alive, and my cat seems to be doing great. She doesn't notice a thing.
So please tell us about the Black String on Triage Ensemble. It's a very unusual name for a very unusual musical enterprise.
The Black String Triage Ensemble is a group of Black and Latinx string players, violin, viola, cello, upright bass, basically a string orchestra. And what they do is, in the immediate aftermath of shootings and certain other events, they go and we play music, not Bach, not Beethoven, but composers of Latinx and African descent. And the music comes from a variety of styles, spirituals, gospel, blues, soul, jazz, reggae. And we do that so that for the people who live in those neighborhoods, the experience of a shooting is not the last thing on their minds before they go to bed.
And there you are, unfortunately, you told me, kept busy by what happens in shootings in parts of Wisconsin.
We are, and the work that we did around shootings is directly in line with our mission, but this year things changed a bit, and we did a couple of peacekeeping missions, situations where we knew that there were tensions, potential for violence around race and racism, and felt the need to use our music to intervene to try to really hold off the violence as much as possible.
Thank you. Bob, you have a question or two?
Yeah, I did a little bit of research, and I noticed that back in 2016, Trump actually won Kenosha County, but not by much. I mean, I'm talking less than 100 votes or something like that. So he managed to snag the county, even though he refers to it as a Democratic problem. And to me, Kenosha County, Racine too, is a good example of the division between the rural Wisconsin and urban Wisconsin, because you go west of I-94 and it's pretty rural, it's farms, it's egg farmers and whatnot. Get to the lakefront and it's urbanized. Kenosha lakefront looks a lot better than I remember. Would you consider Kenosha to be sort of a good example of the stresses we're seeing?
I would say I grew up in Racine, so I know Racine very well. Kenosha and Racine very. You talk about you have to remember
Sorry, we're having trouble. Dayvin, we're having a little trouble hearing you. If you would switch to audio, we can try that, see if that works better. You were coming through clear before.
Yeah, if you can still hear us, just turn off the video. Turn off the video and just hang with the audio for the moment. Okay.
Let's see. In
any case, Kenosha County, my description of Kenosha, as I remember it, is it's an old style blue collar, hardworking neighborhood. In the 80s, it used to be behind Racine in population, but both cities sort of evolved. They discovered their lakefronts and they built it up. Kenosha has gained population, whereas Racine has slipped. So Kenosha has had a lot of good things happen to it, at least population-wise, of late. I don't know the other wheels spinning down there at the moment, but they seem to have come into this century a little better than Racine. Does that reflect what you've seen, Amber?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is Kenosha is a little bit closer to Chicago, and you've seen that sort of growth there. You know, if you think about southeastern Wisconsin, we talk about the connections between kind of the Chicagoland. Is Milwaukee and southern Wisconsin even within that Chicagoland area? Racine has really struggled in terms of the loss of industry, the sort of deindustrialization that has it's multiple decades, but then also thinking about the Great Recession and the ways in which that impacted so many of our communities in our cities in the Midwest in particular. Thinking about Milwaukee, so I know Milwaukee the best because I've lived here for the last decade. It's really heartbreaking to think about where we are today. This was supposed to be the summer of Milwaukee with the DNC. There was a lot of excitement, a lot of development. It felt good, this sort of energy. Now, at the same time, this is a deeply unequal city. One of the most segregated metropolitan areas in the country. Deep divides, racial inequality. And so you had both the excitement and the sort of downtown development, but also a lot of hardship. And still deep pockets of poverty. And so, as we were thinking about the excitement around the convention and kind of going forward, I think many in the city saw it as an opportunity to start to build those bridges and to extend the economic development to neighborhoods that have really they've suffered decades of disinvestment. And of course, I'm a basketball fan, and so we were looking good with the Milwaukee Bucks as well. And so there's a lot of excitement. So, it's been strange to be downtown and just to feel that, the emptiness, to not see people, to not see the Summerfest going on, to not just see the lake. I mean, the lakefront has been, populated. That's a whole nother thing, right? If we're going to talk about COVID. And the bars and all of that, but to your point about this like urban rural divide and kind of what's happening, I think in this country, Wisconsin is whiter than the average state in the United States, right? We are the share of the electorate that is white, does not have a college degree. That's a greater share compared to a higher average compared to the national average. It's a place that Trump found votes here in the state. And so, the question is what these divides are going to look like in November, especially given the sort of reckoning that we're having right now around racism, about racial inequality. I had mentioned the sort of pitch that Trump, earlier today I was talking to someone about the pitch that Trump was making at the RNC last week. It's a bit discordant with what we've heard this week, right, in terms of his reaction to Kenosha, his decision to come to Kenosha tomorrow, despite the governor and the mayor asking him to come a different time. Trying to figure out what this Trump campaign strategy is going to look like. It seems like it's a bit doubling down on that law and order, tough on crime campaign strategy that he has been playing with really throughout the summer, especially since the signature issue that he was hoping to campaign on for his reelection, the economy, just isn't going to be the issue that he's going to be able to campaign on, at least not in the way that he was expecting to.
You've made a number of good points. I was in Racine and Kenosha sort of at the tail end of the blue collar, the busy blue collar era. American Motors had closed a few years before. I was there when Case Tractor was still working in Racine. Of course, Johnson Wax, at least, is still in Racine. But there's been a lot of disappointment in terms of the loss of these blue-collar jobs. And I guess he's looking to feed off of that. The disappointment has been there for a while. But you make a good point in that Kenosha is the first county in from Illinois. And a lot of people from Chicago, Northern Illinois, discovered that Kenosha has marinas and cheaper housing and things like that. So they've sort of benefited there. But yeah, the racial divide, Milwaukee, Kenosha, Racine, was there even as I reported on it. It just didn't feel like it was at the surface because it wasn't spoken at the surface.
Yeah.
One of the things I'd like to do is we have Dayvin Hallmon on the phone with us, and we
Good.
are going to first play an audio clip, a video clip of him speaking in Kenosha County Board of Supervisors. And I'm going to ask Dayvin to just kind of set this up for us so that we understand. This is the 2005 Kenosha County Board meeting. Dayvin, can you just set up what we're about to see?
It would not be 05 because I was not elected until 2008, so it would have been sometime after 2008.
So this is 2015, I think, 2015, 1-5.
That sounds about right. Yes, 2015. I don't know which clip you have because there's more than one.
Okay.
You're in a very good suit and tie, and you're addressing the board. The 2015 clip, the chairman had just thrown it to you, and you had just started to speak.
All right, so we're going to play that, and then we'll get your reaction. One of the things, folks, that we're going to ask Dayvin is what he had seen of all of this, and he had said this to the board in many ways. So we're going to hear that right now.
We have our county judges and community service providers and county staff all in one room to give ourselves a pat on the back. It's a Kenosha County victory lap to say we're doing a great job. And every year I hear our county staff say the exact same thing. Children of color are overrepresented in the data set. And we move on like that's normal, like that's okay, like it should be that way, and that we have no responsibility for it when we're the ones running the system. So imagine the depth of my horror when I read a Sanford psychological study of teachers that says that on the basis of names, on the first offense, according to race, the discipline is even. On the second offense, on the basis of race, if your name is Jim, you're not reprimanded that harshly. If your name is Jamal, they quadruple down on the discipline. We control the flow of young people in the school to prison pipeline. We do that. Our $200 million government. That should not happen. All 8 of our county circuit court judges and the DA will tell you, as they've said to me, without me prompting or asking, they'll say there are sentencing disparities between African Americans and white people. So imagine the trauma when I pick up the newspaper and see a black juvenile that's tried as an adult. Granted, the kid committed murder, and I'm not excusing that. But you try him as an adult in a case where a police officer admits on the witness stand in open court that he planted evidence at the scene. How am I supposed to have confidence in my government or my justice system?
I'm going to pause that there, Dayvin. Please give us that context and tell us, fast forward from there to what is happening today in Wisconsin.
I don't know what to say. I remember saying that, and I remember trying not to cry when I said it. I think you can only cry out so much, both figuratively and literally, before you just throw your hands up and walk away.
Is that what happened, Dayvin? Did you decide to leave the county board, or was it an election decision?
There was no election decision. I looked at this community and I said, these people don't want to change. They like being racist. They like being hateful far too much. And there's literally nothing that I can do. This is not going to get any better. I tried for a decade. I would spend hours and hours. And mind you, that was a part-time position, making $6,000 a year. Outside of being a county supervisor, I was working 2 retail jobs and being music director at a Lutheran church, pulling in anywhere from, I would say, $10,000 a year maximum to maybe 12 to 14. So I wasn't getting 3 meals a day. I didn't have electricity in my apartment during the summer. I was miserable.
But you represent what I've been covering in Wisconsin, in villages and towns. The people, I mean, when you're on the town board,
so when you're on the town board, what is it that you saw there that's still true? Well, you were not surprised by anything that came up, right, Dayvin?
No, I wasn't.
And you had been warning us, and you've been warning the people of Wisconsin that this was what is happening, right?
Yep.
Let me ask Amber, our political science professor, to reflect a little bit on what you just heard from Dayvin and what you saw him say so eloquently in 2015, and that he says today he's not surprised, that he had warned the folks of what's going to happen. Amber?
Yeah, it's painful. Here's someone who is, Dayvin, I just, to take on, to serve your community the way that you did, and to advocate for justice, given how hard it must be, right, to hold down jobs, to do both to be a public servant as well as to, try to have electricity, to put food on the table. I'm hearing this, you think about what is this path forward? How do people have any faith in democratic governance when it's so broken and doesn't represent people and does harm? Not only doesn't represent, but does real harm. I'm curious, Dayvin, about, we've seen in the last few years, people really turn attention to local politics in ways that we haven't really seen in recent decades. Taking on DAs and trying to put in reformers, trying to look at these, the local kind of court elections, these judicial races, to try to get different people on the bench. I'm trying to reconcile that sort of effort of working within the system to make our democracy better when we're faced with just everything from indifference to outright harm. So, when I talk to my students and we try to make sense of this and to make sense of political participation, to the extent to which you work within the system versus system's broken, you can't reform it. You have to protest, you have to take to the streets, you have to find a different way. And I think what we've seen this summer, in some sense, this is not new information at all to people who live in Kenosha, to folks who live in Milwaukee, who've been experiencing this day after day, the sort of indignities. But what we've seen is a sense of it registering perhaps for the first time in a very, very long time to a broader swath of the American public. To see the sort of protests that we've witnessed over these last few months. Some have noted, have been counting this, that this is the largest mass protest movement that the United States has seen. The protests kind of taking place not in the places that we were used to seeing in the news, but the protests taking place in rural communities in Pennsylvania, small communities, the suburbs outside of Milwaukee. And so it feels like we're at this real inflection point of where we will go from here. And I see among my students a lot of despair and cynicism. It is not apathy. I don't want that to be seen as apathy at all. It's not apathy, but a real sense of lack of trust, of faith in our political institutions. But at the same time, those political institutions are how we come together and solve problems. So I struggle in kind of how do we reconcile this? And so, those aren't great, well-formed reactions here. but I'm really struck by, the work that Dayvin's done to try to make things better in Kenosha.
I'll be really brief. And before my Ethernet cut for a second, I was just going to say just that. I remember covering people who were on village boards and town boards and whatnot. And when you're in a big city and you deal with common councils, you think of politicians that get paid for real. But no, county board supervisors, town board people, village board folks, they're part-timers. They don't get paid much, if they get paid anything at all. And I've seen it wring people dry. So I can understand that you put in a lot of time and you just had it.
Thank you. Let's go to Dayvin for his thoughts, and he's been listening very carefully. We have him on audio. He's on the phone, and we're showing a picture of him in his black string Triage Ensemble shirt, and he's the former county board supervisor at Kenosha County who gave that very eloquent testimony in 2015, and he's here with us now, and he's a founder of the Black String Triage Ensemble that tries to bring music and light after violent shootings in and around Milwaukee and other places. So go ahead, please, Dayvin.
I think what no one has talked about regarding Kenosha is the extent of the dishonesty. And when I say that, I mean very specifically this. Milwaukee had a significant black population in the year 1950 and shortly after that. Kenosha didn't have a significant black population until 1980, really. And I kept asking people why this was so, and no one could give me an answer. Every year for MLK Day, the UAW has an annual dinner, and they get together and they would celebrate integrating the assembly line. And I saw all these spaces of black people I'd never seen in Kenosha before. And I asked them, I said, where do you live? Racine. Where do you live? Racine. Where do you live? Racine. And it wasn't until the superintendent of schools, a white man who was Sicilian, mind you, Kenosha has a fairly significant Italian population, but they're Calabrese. They are not Sicilian. The superintendent of schools at the time was Sicilian and a good believer in social justice and an admirable guy. And he told me, he said, Dayvin, we took black people to the border of Kenosha where it meets Racine and said, get out. And when I checked about this and asked people after he told me, a number of them confirmed it. So when you see that video, what you see is me sitting in a room full of people, much older than me, all of them pretty white. I think there may have been one person of color on the board at that time. I can't remember. And they have that knowledge. They've had that knowledge. And they know me. And they'll tell you, we think Dayvin Hallmon's really smart. We think he's a great guy. But none of them told me that. I had to find that out in the worst way. So I think there's this dishonesty and a sick, twisted selfishness about the generations above me that have enabled this and have allowed this. Because we should not be seeing things today that look exactly like what we saw in 1960.
I couldn't agree more, Dayvin. Thank you for being with us here tonight. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, and we'll bring you back in with some comments in just a minute. Just for everybody who's watching, we're having a very important conversation about the situation in Wisconsin that is going to get inflamed even further because of Trump's arrival in a town and in a state where the governor and the mayor have asked him not to come, and he's going to insert himself. He has decided that calling himself the law and order president is going to get him votes. And this is under his watch that all of this is happening. But before we do that, we do have to pay some bills. So we want to just thank our sponsors for just a couple of minutes very quickly. Please tag your friends. Please share with them this conversation. They can watch this later on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or LinkedIn. So we'd love our speakers to share this if they haven't had a chance to do that yet. And we want to thank our sponsors, Muckrack Academy, Fundamentals of Social Media, a free certification course that you can take right now, mrac.co/social. More than 4,000 people have taken this course. It's about 2 hours of work. You can do it in 2 days or 2 months or 2 hours. We also want to thank nonbelievable.com, divinely delicious cookies on a mission. Each handcrafted cookie provides a meal for those in need. 20% off with the code Sree, S-R-E-E, at nonbelievable.com. And we also want to thank Charles Cunnan Carroll and the book, The Inventor in You, a step-by-step guide to your first invention by Charles Cunnan Carroll, developer of more than 80 patents. He's at Inventor Charles, and his website is guidetoinvention.com. Please take a look and please support our sponsors. We also want to say hello to our event partner, Rise or Fall Together, the One Shared World Interdependence Summit 2020, Thursday, September 17th, 9 to 12 Eastern, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern. Register now, oneshared.world. Globally famous speakers. These are just some of them on the screen. More of them are being announced shortly. oneshared.world. And please tell your friends and family to register as well. And now we're going to go back to our show and to meet again Bob Anthony, who is with us. Hi, Bob. Bob is a technology reporter in New York who is at New York Bob, but he is for tonight Wisconsin Bob because he used to be a reporter at Wisconsin newspapers. And we're also joined by Professor Amber Wichowsky at Marquette in the Poli-Science Department. Hello, Professor. Thank you for being here. We're very grateful to have you. And I know you're in the middle of your start of school and everything, so we appreciate you being here. And we're also joined by Dayvin Hallmon. Dayvin is a former Kenosha County Board Supervisor at the heart of the part of the state where all of this is going down. And he's the founder of the Black String Triage Ensemble, a very unusual organization that brings music by Black and Latinx musicians to scenes of tragedy and violence and shootings. And the fact that in America we can have an organization like this, that we need an organization like this, is so sad. Dayvin, where were you when you heard the Jacob Blake news? Where were you when you saw that video a week ago? What were your immediate thoughts when you saw that shooting in the back of 7 times of Jacob Blake?
I was in my apartment where I currently live in Milwaukee, and my twin flame sent me a text message and said they shot a man in cold blood, Kenosha police. And I said, send me the video link. And I looked at it, and I turned to my piano player, who I was hanging out with at the time, and I said, you need to see this. And he watched it, and he said, that's the most heinous thing I've ever seen. And I said, I know, Kenosha's going to burn tonight.
And you knew that that's how the community would respond in terms of the protest, that they would be angry because this isn't about just this incident. It's about the racism that has snowballed into something like this.
I can tell you as a county board supervisor, one particular incident where I intervened between law enforcement and my Black constituents that had an argument so that that would never, ever happen.
Go ahead. What was the incident and how did it go down?
I came home one day after work to try to take a nap, and I laid down, and the windows were open. It was summer. I heard screaming and yelling. I came running down the stairs. I turned to my left, looked across the street, 2 houses in on both sides. The front yards were full of Black people. I saw a woman run in the house, and she came running out with a bat. A squad car rolled up right in front of me. I walked halfway into the street because I don't trust KPD, and they don't pay attention to who the county folks are because they're city police. They pay attention to the alderman. I said, officers, I'm County Board Supervisor Dayvin Hallmon. I realize you have a weapon and a license to kill, and you will do so if necessary. Those are my constituents. I don't know what weapons they do or don't have, but please, can I call some friends and mediate this because I don't want anybody to die on my street. And the 2 officers sitting in the squad, both in their jackets with the shotgun between them, looked at me and said, you can do that, but you don't have much time.
And how did it end, Dayvin?
So as I was talking to them, and I called my pastor, I called a friend of mine who's still on the city council, I called another friend of mine who's the county treasurer, and said, made my suggestion as to this is what's going on, and this is what I'd like to do. They also call us if you need us. Well, as I was doing that, both of those yards full of Black people stopped what they were doing because they wanted to know, who is this young Black man talking to the police Why is he not scared of the police? Is he a narc? And he looks like he might be gay, and we don't really like gay people. So that had cooled off, so I didn't need to really do anything. The police went away, and I walk over to these yards of black folk and introduce myself. Hi, Dayvin Hallmon, County Supervisor. The men were not having it. They didn't believe it. They did not believe I was who I said I was. Some of the women who were sitting there with children on the front step, some of them believed it, but most of them didn't. And that was when I realized that I needed to leave. I couldn't trust my law enforcement. Nobody was working on the issue of homophobia as a black gay man. So who's protecting me when I'm working on everybody else's behalf? Nobody.
I feel that right to the core. That's I'm sorry, I'm just blown away by that account. That's just astounding. I mean, I cover, like I said, I cover people who are on village boards, town boards, county boards, but I don't get to see their everyday give and take with their constituents. And there you were out there literally rolling out of bed to defuse the situation. And even you felt like a plate of glass, like people were just seeing through you and you weren't making a difference. I think you obviously did make a difference, but I can understand your disappointment.
You have to do something, because if you don't, let's say the officers, for whatever legitimate reason, have to fire on somebody. That's one of your constituents. Doesn't matter. You now have an angry black population. Let's say one of them does something ridiculous and kills one of your law enforcement. Now somebody is missing a family member, and you have a department that wants revenge, and it's going down in your district, and there's nobody white that's going to be able to help you. There's nobody white that can save you. You will be left to pick up the ashes all alone.
I get that 100%. And obviously there's no answers. I mean, Kenosha has been a disappointment based on what I've seen and what I've read in this regard for a while. I remember dealing with police in Milwaukee. I used to know the sheriff in Racine, I think a guy named Robert Roner. I believe the mayor of Kenosha when I was down there was a guy named John Bellotti. I had no problem dealing with them, but when you call ahead and say you're coming from the newspaper, that's a little different from being a town board member or something like that, because there's a little bit of weight behind me. Lacking that weight, I couldn't have accomplished what I did, obviously. I couldn't have dared speak to the sheriff that easily.
Sure. Folks, we're just pulling on screen right now a development from today. We are seeing a story. A journalist quits the Kenosha paper in protest of its Jacob Blake rally coverage. Daniel Thompson, an editor of the Kenosha News, resigned over a headline that highlighted a speaker who made a threat during a peaceful protest. Instead of covering it in an overall way, it was covered very directly to make it look like it was a violent story. And I'm showing this on screen right now. This is and he says at the end, by noon Sunday, the headline had been changed on the Kenosha news site. Kenosha speaker strays from message at rally. I hear the headline's been changed, Mr. Thompson wrote on Facebook. Wow, only took me quitting is what he said after what went down in at the paper, the Kenosha News. Let me bring in Professor Amber Wichowsky, who's been listening to all of this. Your thoughts, and then we'll go to some questions from our audience who've been watching for all this time.
Well, media coverage matters. How the media cover the protests has a direct relationship with the ways in which the public is reacting to them. In the protests following George Floyd's death, you saw in general the media really cover the peaceful nature of the protests, really highlighting the injustices at the core of the protest. I had mentioned that public opinion in support of Black Lives Matter, seeing the protests as legitimate, as a valid reaction to what went down in Minneapolis. As we head into, both we've got Kenosha, but we also have Portland, right? We've also kind of simultaneously, these news stories are hitting our newspapers and our screens. So how the media are covering Kenosha, I think, is really important. We're at a moment, I think, where polling suggests that support for the protest has subsided a bit amongst white Americans. I could say a lot more about public opinion and on what dimensions white Americans, their opinions seem to have shifted, and in what ways they really haven't. So in the last month, we've seen kind of public support for protest have subsided just a bit, at the margins. At the same time, though, every single time that Trump has put himself kind of at the center of the story, which he's going to be doing, when he comes to Kenosha, opinion kind of reacts negatively. At the same time that support for protest has subsided a bit, it's not that Americans are holding and see Trump as someone who's been able to manage and handle this crisis by any stretch of the imagination. It's been the opposite. So, the journalists quitting and concern about the ways in which the types of images that journalists are using, the editors are using to depict, it shapes the broader public narrative about what these protests are about, who's involved, how Americans think about them, and the issues at stake. So, yes, these are big, momentous events. And I'll be really curious to see how this unfolds in Kenosha kind of tomorrow and in the weeks ahead.
And we worry about that. There are less than 65 days or so to the election, and how all of this will come to a head. Mark Lee's watching, a fellow Marquette person, an alum. Yes, we believe in social justice. I remember going to school in the 80s when Ernest Lacey was killed, one of the early Black Lives Matter cases. Obviously wasn't known by that, but that's an example. We have lots of comments coming in. We haven't been able to talk about all the comments, but I'm just going to pull up some of the. I'm just going to show folks. Rehajan is linking to Professor Wichowsky's page at the Klingler College of Arts and Sciences at Marquette. We also see a comment from our friend Rehajan, who is linking to a description of what he calls Sundown Towns, Sheboygan and others. What is a sundown town?
Go
ahead. Are you familiar with that term?
I think is Bob muted? Sorry, I can also go.
Go ahead.
Right, but the idea that these are towns that are not safe for Black people at night. That I think we talked a little bit about the sense that of belonging, of insiders, outsiders, and the racism and the violence. Wisconsin has a really fraught history with race relations. I think in our private chat we've been talking here as well. People were talking about the 1960s. You had George Wallace, getting some large crowds here in the state, in Milwaukee, on the south side of Milwaukee in particular. So there's a deep, fraught history here that we're once again facing in really painful ways, in real visible ways. And so I think this comment here about Dayvin, hats off, absolutely. People who are trying to fight for justice here.
Apollo says, wow, Dayvin, hats off. You guys are going through it. And it's cold in Wisconsin, apparently beyond the winter. They expelled an entire population of people, and no one called that ethnic cleansing in Racine. You are all living with it. And Apollo is watching from Las Vegas, and he has talked about what it's like to be a Black American living in Vegas, also living in India, where he had been and spent time there. And I believe it's Apollo's birthday. So Apollo, we are meeting under difficult circumstances, but we wish you a happy birthday. People are tagging. Joe is asking, do you believe that the police are not trained well? So I'll ask each of you if you have an opinion on that, starting with Dayvin.
It's deeper than training. People have to understand that in this country we call the United States, that white people used to literally eat us because they thought that by consuming the genitals of men, it would make them more powerful and more sexually potent. Training isn't enough.
Bob?
Well, right now I have a bit more faith in the county sheriff, a little bit, more than I have in the police chief. I mean, the police chief, when asked about the young man who was, when asked about the people who died on account of the young man who came to Kenosha with the long gun, said, well, it's basically an effect of people not honoring the curfew. I mean, that was his take on it. So I don't know how well the police are being trained under a guy like that. But the sheriff, at least, pointed out that law enforcement needs to provide the law enforcement, not people with long guns coming from out of state.
And can you imagine if it was a black man carrying that long gun, a young black man or an old black man, that would have ended very differently. They were waving to him as he walked by after shooting these people. Go ahead, David.
I want to push back on that about Kenosha County Sheriff David Best. There was nobody's first year to get items from the federal government 1033 program than him. And I always wondered in my mind, what in the hell was this man stocking up for? And I'm pretty certain this was it.
Can you just explain what that is? Is that military-style weaponry from the federal government? Is that correct?
Exactly. The 1033 program made available to local governments all kinds of tools from the federal government, from the military, from the DOD, surplus items no longer in use, and they would provide them to local governments really without any kind of training whatsoever. And even in the wake of Ferguson in Baltimore, community said this is not a good idea. We should not be deploying these against our citizens, and I warned the county board against doing this, but they didn't care.
Got it. Thank you. We only have a few minutes left, and we have so many comments and questions coming in here. Let me ask Professor Amber Wichowsky to kind of put in context, how do you teach young people to have hope, your students at Marquette, when this is the kind of stuff they're seeing, the hate and the rhetoric coming from Washington, coming from some people in their own state? I don't want to forget David Clark. Is that his name, of the Wisconsin sheriff that Trump loves with the cowboy hat? A Black American who is a sheriff in Milwaukee and is one of the most conservative, racist policies that he advocates. So how do you talk to young people about all of this, Amber?
Yeah, so I think we talk about all the forms of political engagement, right? And why they're all important, right? It's not just about elections. And in fact, I'm teaching a class this semester that's about campaigns and elections, and we're focused on 2020. But I'm not actually going to be getting to the kind of the nuts and bolts of campaigning and campaign strategy and theories of electoral behavior until we kind of situate and provide a foundation about what are the functions of elections in a democracy? What role do they play in terms of getting better representation and sanctioning or holding political elites accountable? And elections are not enough. So we talk a lot about the other ways in which we deepen our own engagement in political life and why that's important. Because we are members of that polity. And it is how we figure out what we want to do, how we want to live amongst one another, how we solve the problems that are affecting us and that we care deeply about. And so it is everything from being engaged in the community, whether we're thinking about the kinds of community organizations and community efforts that Davin's also involved in, right? He wasn't just a county supervisor, but also thinking about his program to bring music as a way of healing when people are experiencing just the most profound, deepest trauma. It's thinking about running for office oneself and not just thinking about the national level, but also really the local level and how important that is. and how much of our day-to-day is affected not by what's going on in Washington, D.C., but it's very much affected by our elected folks in our local communities. We talk about the role of protest, what it means to kind of take to the streets and why that matters, and the ways in which those rights are protected under the Constitution, right? Our free speech rights. The ability for our students, I'm teaching this writing seminar, and the importance of having those communicative skills, the ability to write to people in power and to explain and to communicate, to stand up in a local village board meeting, if you will, a county board meeting, to explain where government is failing and where government can do what government could do better. That these are all the sort of tools that we need, and we need to practice them day in and day out. Democracy is a process. It's not just a thing that exists out there. At the same time, I think I'm struggling, in these moments where the trust in our political institutions is so broken. It's so low in all sorts of institutions, including the media. And so we talk about why having a vigorous, robust, strong, especially local news reporting is so important to a democracy, in the ways in which local news is really under threat these days. So it's voting in elections, but it's so much more. And at the same time, I think, I'm really encouraged by students, the students who are taking to the streets, the students that will be voting, those that are trying to engage and persuade their peers about the issues that they care about.
Thank you. Just two quick questions, two comments that have come in. Sunny says defunding or diverting funds from police should be a good start. Follow the lead from Austin. And Joe says some pundits are hinting that Biden needs to distance himself from the BLM because of negative polling. How do you assess that as a political scientist?
Yeah. I mean, Biden is, during the early summer, June protests, he was really kind of invisible. Whether that was like this sort of deliberate sort of campaign strategy or not, he's unable to he needs to be more visible. We're in that different part of the campaign. I think we saw these tensions, for the Democratic Party and for Biden's candidacy, his campaign strategy to try to hold these diverse elements of this coalition together. I mentioned that public opinion about protests has generally been quite positive, but when you peel back these onion layers and ask, what are white Americans willing to do, willing to support? You don't see the support for defunding the police. You don't see the support for reparations. You don't see support for the sort of investments in housing, the desegregation of our public schools. You just don't see that level of support. And so Biden, I think that there is some truth there in terms of his wanting to be, to not be so closely associated with, it's not so much the activists, but what the ways in which the Trump campaign will try to define Biden and the candidacy, to be someone who's standing with sort of lawlessness. And you saw it today from Biden. So Biden was in Pittsburgh giving a talk that was covered, and, in some sense trying to guard against these criticisms that will come, these attacks that will come tomorrow. I think he was quite vocal, saying, I know good cops. I know that I can bring police to the table to kind of solve these problems. So there is that piece that Biden is the sort of pitch to that the American electorate, but at the same time acknowledging the racism, the deep racial inequality, the racial reckoning that we're having in 2020 yet again. So it's a challenge for Biden. And I think what we will see in the coming weeks is both campaigns trying to define in ways that are advantageous, that kind of allow them to campaign on their turf. Trump's going to want to, pivot and make it about law and order, and to paint Biden as an extremist who's, for just defunding the police. Those are the ads that he's been airing a bit. Biden's very much going to be trying to talk about healing and bring the racial healing into it, making it a bit broader, and talking a bit more about the sort of threats to democracy. So I think we were seeing hints of what's to come in Biden's speech today and a little bit last week that we saw, or 2 weeks ago, I should say now, thinking about the DNC.
It feels like it was yesterday, but
I know it's unreal the ways in which these events have unfolded.
And we're close to running out of time, but I want Dayvin to come in here. And Dayvin, tell us, what are you working on? How can people support your ensemble, the Black String Triage Ensemble? And what are the other things that you're working on?
So at present, the Black String Triage Ensemble, I would encourage everyone who can and is willing to give. Doesn't matter whether it's a large dollar amount or a small. You can go on our website. There's a donate tab to do that. The goal is so that there can be chapters in every single corner of the United States, so that we can have Black and Latinx musicians playing Black and Latinx music after these tragedies occurred. The reason that the Black String Triage Ensemble was created is really as a repudiation of all of the nasty from multiple dimensions that you see that has occurred in Kenosha. I literally didn't know any other way. I had to do something personally as a human being, as a musician, as an artist, to preserve my own well-being and to try to help others. And this is it.
Well, thank you for doing that. We're going to encourage everybody to go to the blackstringtriageensemble.org and please support Dayvin and his colleagues as they do this important work. I mean, it's so tragic that we have this work, that you're kept busy enough by all the tragedy that happens. Dayvin, one of the things we asked Kimberly Crenshaw, the great Columbia Law School professor who coined the term intersectionality, what can we do to be allies of Black folks? And she said, say their names. And so we're going to do that at the end of the show. So we will do that, but we encourage everybody to find and support the Black String Triage Ensemble. If you're a journalist, how is this for an unusual story? And this amazing young man who has already been a county supervisor in Kenosha, speaking out about his community and about his people. What a great story. I'll be honored to connect you with Dayvin anytime you like. Please email me at sree@sree.net. So with that, I will let both Dayvin and Amber get back to their evenings in Kenosha. I know that in Kenosha and in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, I know tomorrow is going to be a tense day with a lot of problems that are being injected into already a tense situation. But we wish you both the very best, and thank you for being with us here tonight. Amber, thank you very much, and same to you, Dayvin. Thank you for being here.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you.
We'll say goodbye, and thank you very much. And to you, Bob, I'd like to hear a couple of final thoughts from you, and then if you would, do me the honor of joining me as we say their names. You've done that with me before.
Sure, I'll definitely do that. But yeah, it's funny that you can just sit and listen to the radio or look at the TV and just exhaust yourself, go to bed tired and worn out just by the disappointment of the things that you see. I've already said a prayer. I'm not religious. I already said a prayer today for the Kenosha County, for whatever's going to happen tomorrow, because that's how afraid I am that things will go badly. So I give a prayer to the community that it turns out well, that he manages not to infuriate too many people. The fact that he's not even going to visit with the family is a insult to the community in itself. But I will definitely say the names with you. It's a tough time to be a Kenosian.
I hear you, and he has not talked about the Jacob Blake shooting. As soon as he heard about the Portland shooting, he immediately talked about it. But here he said he still needed to see the facts and understand things. The facts are not something he cares about. We're so grateful to Dayvin. Thank you, Dayvin, for being with us, and to Professor Wichowsky. Please follow at Amber Wichowsky on Twitter. She was absolutely terrific and gave us a lot of insight. So now I just want to read some of these comments coming in. Rahajan says, thank you, Bob, Professor Wichowsky, and Dayvin Hallmon. Blessings to all of you and your respective families and loved ones. And here is Mark is sharing his comments. Jonathan is sharing his comments. And Vandana has put in a link to the Black String Triage Ensemble. Did you know that there is such an organization, Bob?
I had no idea until he mentioned it on the show, because I didn't even get that far in chatting with him. That's a fabulous sounding initiative that obviously he and his colleagues came up with.
Yeah, and the sad news is that there is a need for such a thing in this country. So we always start by showing this Time magazine cover of Titus Kaffir's painting of a mother with her child taken away. You see the blue glove of the pandemic. On the right, you see a young Larcinia Floyd with her son, George Floyd. I'll never forget this photograph as long as I live. She would die 2 years almost to the day that he would be murdered in Minneapolis. They're now buried together in Houston, and such a sad story. We are now going to share with you the names that our friend Rahajan has updated and put together for us, so that we can read them here on the show. So as we do this, Bob, I will read these names, and then I'll read a few, and then you'll read a few with me, and we'll go from there. So let me start by just the names of the news, right? The names in the news, sadly. Anthony Huber and Joseph Rosenbaum were killed by white supremacists on August 25th, and Jacob Blake was shot by police on August 23rd. And here are the names that we will be reading. Danny Buckley, Trayford Pellerin, David McAtee, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. Look at the work, if I may just pause here for a second. Look at the work that our friend Rehajan has done. He has not only assembled these, he has put the dates and put the ages with each one. This is a labor of love and respect for these folks who died, Bob. That's what he has done here. Let me just start again. David McAtee, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Michael Dean, Tatiana Jefferson. Elijah McClain was put in a chokehold by police and then died a few days later. Botham Jean, Antoine Rose II, Danny Ray Thomas, and Stephon Clark.
Wait till you scroll. Anthony Weber, Heather Heyer, Aaron Bailey, Keenan King, and Anthony Holmes Garrigues. Charlena Chavon Lyles, Jordan Edwards, Svinas Kochabolta. I apologize for the pronunciation.
I know we put this, we just threw this at you, so don't worry.
Okay.
Srinivas Kuchibotla and Ashok Madani were shot by white supremacists, and Kuchibotla died of his names in 2017. Go ahead.
Quinice Haynes, Chad Robertson, Muhammad Muhammin Jr., Terrence Crutcher.
Corin Gaines, Joseph Mann, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, Kaylin Rockmore, Janet Wilson, Jeremy McDowell, Angelo Perry, India Kager, Mansour Bal Bey, Samuel Dubose, Darius Stewart, and Sandra Bland. Some of these names, Bob, are household names. People know them, but so many names are new and not known to people, and that's part of this tragedy here.
Exactly. Jonathan Sanders, Clementa Pinckney, Cynthia Hurd, Susie Jackson, Ethel Lee Lance, DePayne Middleton Doctor, Twianza Sanders, Daniel L. Simmons, Sharonda Coleman Singleton, Myrna Thompson, Alexis Christian, William L. Chapman II, Freddie Gray Jr., Walter Lamar Scott.
Eric Courtney Harris, Maya Hall, Megan Hockaday, Janisha Fonville, Natasha McKenna, Jerame Reed, Tamir Rice, 12 years old, Akai Gurley, Tanisha Anderson, and Aura Rosser.
Shanique Proctor, Laquan McDonald, Michelle Casso, Ezel Ford, Michael Brown Jr., Eric Garner.
Hurley Golden, age 93. Gabriela Navarez, Yvette Smith, Renisha McBride, Andy Lopez, age 13, Miriam Carey, Kayam Livingston, Kayla Moore, Hadia Pendleton, age 15, Shelley Frey, Timothy Russell and Melissa Williams, Shulena Weldon, Alicia Thomas, Chantel Davis, Charmel Edwards, Rekia Boyd, Charisse Francis, Trayvon Martin, age 17.
Ayanna Stanley Jones, Marcelo Lucero, Brandon McLennan, Ravi Budu, Tanika Wilson, Catherine Johnston, Alberta Sproul, Kendra James, Balbir Singh Sudhi, Latanya Haggerty, Margaret Laverne Mitchell.
And so you can see that he has put together the names of those who were killed by police and killed by racists and white supremacists. Balbir Singh Sodhi, if you look at that date, Bob, September 15, 2001. This is right after 9/11. He was the first person killed in a hate crime because he was sick. People thought that he must be Muslim, so that justified him being shot by a man just drove by his gas station and shot him to death because they presumed he was Muslim. Taisha Miller, Amadou Diallo, James Byrd Jr., Danette Daniels, Frankie Ann Perkins, Johnny Gamage, Sanji Taylor, Philip Pennell, Yusuf Hawkins, Michael Griffith, Barry Allen, Troy Canty, Daryl Caby, James Ramsor, Eleanor Bumpers, Michael Stewart, Vincent Chin, killed by two racists on June 23rd, 1982, a very famous incident in the Asian American community. Willie Turks, Eula Love, Jose Campos Torres, Clarence Triggs, killed after participating in a civil rights march for voting on July 30th, 1966. James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, Michael Schooner, killed by police in the Ku Klux Klan in 1964. Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, and Carol McNair, killed by church bombings by the Ku Klux Klan in 1963. Go ahead, Bob.
Mac Charles Parker, Clinton Melton, Emmett Till, Isaac Woodard Jr., O'Day H. Short, Helen Short, Barry Short, and Carol Ann Short, George Stinney Jr., Claude Neal, Raymond Gunn.
And he's really done his research, as you can see. Thomas Shipp and Abram Smith, lynched by a mob, 1930. Samuel Smith, 15, lynched, hanged, and shot by a white mob. Herman Arthur and Irvie Arthur, 17. Elias Clayton, Elmer Jackson, and Isaac McGee, 1920. Robert Krosky and Miles Pfeiffer, veteran, shot by a mob in 1919. Charles Lewis, veteran, lynched by masked men in 1918. Zachariah Walker, burned alive by a mob in 1911. Paul Reed and Will Cato. Marie Thompson, Fred Rochelle, 16. Levy Harrington, Francis McIntosh. Oh, look at these names. It goes back. Obviously, it doesn't cover everything, but he's really done an incredible job pulling these together. Bob, thank you for reading these with me.
Some of those names are obviously from very widely known cases. Some are not. As a newspaper person, a lot of the names still send a few chills, but didn't mean to interrupt.
No, thank you. And what is it like to be a Black man who has obviously had a very good career and continues to have a good career and so much success in this country? When you see a list like that, when you think about folks in this country who don't have a shot at being successful because of the racism, I'm sure you've had your own share of it. What does that tell you about this country, that we can have someone like you and all the other people who face so much oppression every day?
Well, some days you're disappointed. Some days you can smile. Some days it rolls off your back. Some days it punches you in the face. Some days are like this when I can talk about it with you and other people. Other days I just have to deal with the racists in my own neighborhood. So it's day to day, point to point. But the good thing is that there are opportunities to do better. Whether we as a nation will take advantage of it, I That's the part that continues to disappoint me.
Thank you, Bob. And you must tell me if you ever feel like this is too much that we put on you when we ask you to talk about these issues. You're a tech reporter. You're just trying to do your job, and we bring you into this in part because it's hard to get away, isn't it?
Well, believe me, Sree, I treasure these opportunities to talk about it, and I mean that. You're not putting any pressure on me or anything like that. But yeah, I'm just trying to be a geek who covers tech and writes an occasional travel story, looking forward to living in peace in this society. But it's a tough thing to do under this administration.
Thank you for sharing that. Neil Parekh from our team at Digimentors. Great show. Thank you. Great perspective and context on the day's news. Rochelle Watanabe Baton says, thank you. Since childhood in New York City, every time I see a cop, I think of Clifford Glover, Eleanor Bumpers, and Michael Griffiths. Think about how many of you know those names. Some of you know those names, but many of you don't. Apollo says that they are all so young, those killed. One does wonder if there's a dark conspiracy to commit human sacrifice in public, because that's how some people believe that they accrue spiritual power. That's almost Faustian in operation and so pagan. Do we live in a Christian country? I do not believe that anymore. I'm not sure anymore. Floored, he says. Neil says, this list gets me every time. And Rajan, thank you for all the work you put in. Rachel says, please add Clifford Glover, 1973, NYPD kills boy 10. Police officer acquitted of murder and fired from the force. Amen, Bob, says Apollo. Thank you, everyone, for this show. Don't forget to add Ernest Lacey to this list. Rajan says, I haven't prayed so hard for the outcome of presidential election since I was 9 years old during Nixon versus McGovern, and we know how that election ended. But Rajan, thank you for your part in our everyday community that we have built here, the thousands of people who watch and share their comments. It means so much. And to Bob, thank you for everything you do. We're just quickly going to thank our sponsors. Again, it seems inane to have to think about commerce here, but that's how media works, right, Bob? You know the importance of supporting our supporters, the people who support your shows and your content. You should support as well. Everybody who's watching, pay for journalism, pay for local reporters. Think of Daniel Thompson, who dropped out of, who quit his job because he didn't want to be part of the system that covers stories the way and those headlines the way that he saw them and was so upset. We want to thank Muckrack Academy for putting together Fundamentals of Social Media, my certification course, now available for free, mrac.co/social. Everybody, please check that out. We definitely want to hear that you've been able to take that course. We also want to thank nunbelievable.com. Divinely delicious cookies on a mission. Please check out Nunbelievable, 20% off with the code SREE. We are very grateful to them for supporting us. Also, a big thank you to The Inventor in You, a step-by-step guide to your first invention by Charles Cunnan Carroll, developer of more than 80 patents at Inventor Charles, guide-to-invention.com. I know Bob would love that book because he's a tinkerer and creator of great things himself. And we want to thank our event partner, Rise or Fall Together, the OneShared.World Interdependence Summit 2020, Thursday, September 17th, a free program from 9 to noon Eastern. You don't want to miss this. OneShared.World, world-famous speakers appearing for free. You don't want to miss that. And we are our friends at She's on Call, Sundays at 11 a.m. Eastern, Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar and Dr. Marina Kurian. And we had two fantastic guests this week, Dr. Monica Gutierrez and Dr. Marsha Harris. We talked about colon cancer that felled our superhero in Chadwick Boseman, and we talked about rehab and coronavirus and how some people are being forced to learn to walk again, talk again, and eat again. And I do, before Bob goes, I just want to give him a chance to say something about Chadwick.
Well, first of all, I'm glad that Channel 7 showed the movie again yesterday so that I could fill in the spots in my brain that I had forgotten. But yeah, what a spirit, what a soul. And, people say good things about people when they pass. But to a man and a woman. People just talk about his ability to pass his spirit on to other people who needed it. So God bless a life very well lived.
Beautifully put. And on that note, we're going to say goodbye, folks. As soon as we're done, the show is going to start right over Wisconsin in Crisis. I do want to tell you, tomorrow, 11 a.m., we have a very special show, 175 episodes, Bob. You've been there from the beginning with us. The WHO explains mass gatherings, including sporting events. Maurizio Barbesci, who is the WHO scientist and expert on mass events, will be with us. He's in Geneva. Dalia Samuri will be with us. She leads health emergency preparedness in WHO's office in Cairo. And co-host Amanat Kuller will be here sitting in Bob's spot. She is with Scroll, covering health, politics, and society. We are going to learn about the price that America will pay for not paying enough attention to how mass gatherings happen. And with that, we'll say goodnight. Please check out this show right after this runs. Tag a friend. They can watch again. It's going to start right away. Amber Wichowsky, professor at Marquette of Political Science, and Dayvin Hallmon, a former Kenosha County Board Supervisor and the founder of the Black String Triage Ensemble. I find it difficult, Bob, to even say those words, that we need a musical ensemble to be there to triage at violent incidents. So sad that it exists, but so proud that it exists. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you soon, and good luck, and please be safe. And our thoughts are with everybody